As a trauma survivor, I have always been interested in resilience. But growing up, I believed it was something that you were born with. Then in graduate school, I learned that it was a quality that we all possess and a set of skills we can all strengthen. Most of my resilience has come from writing and seeing myself in new ways by confronting the stories I've always told myself. The more I did that, the stronger I became, and I've dedicated my life to helping others do this work. This podcast is for anyone who wants to understand their story and how to revise it, because when we do that work, we change the world. I met Brett Will Taylor when we were both workshopping excerpts of our memoirs at the 2019 Writers Hotel Conference. We immediately hit it off and have had many deep dive conversations over the years about his practice of shamanism, the healing capacity of our stories, and how zooming out to the big picture can help us create work that transforms all of us. Brett is a consultant to Fortune 100 companies and a thought partner to men interested in their own development. Currently, he is writing a one-man show called Home Free. On the surface, the show is about selling and emptying the family home of 40 years. On a deeper level, it's about the stories we tell ourselves, why we create them, why it's so hard to let go of them, and what happens when we do. During our conversation, Brett and I explored the many ways we can lean into the mystery of our stories and our lives. Before we get to this conversation, I have a few questions for you. What are the family stories you're living from? Who are your people, and who or what do you consider to be your guides? How do you grapple with the things that no longer serve you? When you do this grappling, do you kick it all away, or do you ever take what you like and leave the rest to the scrapyard? How does this work and the work of being present in your life help you find and sharpen your writing voice? I hope you ponder these questions as you listen to this episode. Now, let's get to my conversation with Brett Will Taylor. Hey writers, have you started a memoir only to get lost in a sea of endless stories that seem to go nowhere? Are you wading through the messy middle of the revision process and searching for your narrative arc? Have you received vague feedback from agents or publishers, or been explicitly told your book contains a lot of interesting and well-written stories that follow in and then format? The solution to all three problems is the same: find your memoir's beats. But for most writers, it isn't as simple as buying a copy of Blake Schneider's book, Save the Cat, and following his formula. In fact, many memoirists find certain beats confusing, and some wonder if this contrived Hollywood formula will work for their book. That's why I'm teaming up with Jane Friedman to teach Create Your Memoirs Beat Sheet on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. During this 90-minute webinar, you'll learn how to capitalize on the benefits of a beat sheet, scrap the parts that might not serve your story, discover how a beat sheet can be used even with a nonlinear memoir, and gain confidence as you shape your material into a compelling book. Best of all, this webinar is just $25. You heard me, $25. That includes the webinar, a PDF of my slides, and a comprehensive workbook that will help you apply these principles to your story, no matter the structure you've chosen. So if you want to tame your material, find your narrative arc, and feel confident that the book you're querying is truly the story you wish to tell, go to janefriedman.com and click online classes. Or make it easy on yourself and click on the link in the show notes. Brett Will Taylor, I am so glad that you're here today with me on the Writing Your Resilience podcast. So welcome.
It's awesome to be here. Good to see you.
So you have been working on a one-man show, and you're also here to talk about your practice of shamanism and how that relates to resilience. So I'd like to start by asking you, tell us about this show that you've been working on.
Absolutely. And by the way, and thank you for having me here as well. So the show came about because I went through the process of selling and emptying our family home of the past 40 years in a suburb just north of Dallas. And as I went through that, a number of people were like, you should write about this because a lot of people are going through it. And as somebody memorably said to me, we're sort of building the raft of going through it as we go through the rapids. So the idea was to do a show about that and just that process, that journey. But as I wrote it, a deeper meaning showed up, which is that it's really a show about stories. And it's, why do we create stories in our lives? Why is it so hard to let go of some of them? But what happens when we do let go? And to me, that is so intertwined with the experience many of us have who find ourselves dealing with the family home, caring for our parents or elders, or going through our own aging process, is we come up against over and over again the stories we have carried our entire life. And so, again, I want the show to just help us pause and reflect on, why did we ever create them? Why is it sometimes so hard to let them go? And what happens when you do?
I absolutely love that on two levels. You and I have talked about this in the past because we've known each other. We've known each other for, gosh, what is it, about almost 4 years now? We met at the Writers Hotel conference, and we've known each other and had all kinds of conversations. And I recently sold my father's home. I'm caring for him because he recently had heart surgery. And as I've been thinking about this process and the stories that I've been carrying and how I'm confronting those, there's a way that our generation is the canary in the coal mine of what's
Mm,
coming down the pike, right?
yep.
For us, and so there is a way that we need to confront these stories for the life we're living now and for any work that we need to do with family members, but also for what's going to happen to us when we're
Yes.
aging.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the big piece is to use the process. The show is called Home Free. And it's called that because there were so many angels who showed up for me as I went through this. And over, and I do not use the word free or you'll be free, but over and over, that's what people said. And to
Mm.
me, part of this is for us to shed. I
Mm-hmm.
think we live in a time, we live in a world, we live in a society where we almost have too many stories. There's too many stacks. And we have made our lives unnecessarily complex. It's hard to know which way is up. And that makes you hold on more and more, when to me, what I found is the opposite is what you need to do. You need to
Yes.
let go. The show ends with me driving away from this house of 40 years, which had furniture that had been in my life my entire life. And I was free, that I drove off into the horizon with no stories to my name,
Mm.
which begins the next process. But I think, to me, that's in the shaman practice, only death can bring birth, and things cannot die if you hold on to them. And and I think we have to learn as a society how to let go.
Yes. I think that's a huge, huge practice. And, a lot of the work that I do around resilience is around confronting these stories that we have. And,
Yep.
I've had a chance to read some of the things that you've written about that experience. You wrote about it beautifully on Facebook and I believe Instagram. And when I thought about all that furniture, there was like a heaviness in my body,
Mm, mm,
and like right here is where I feel it in my heart. For those
wow.
of you who can't see, that's where I feel the heaviness around the furniture. And I'm just imagining that weight.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. The show starts with the story of someone saying to me, a friend with benefits, shall we say, saying to me, because I had to move into this house that had been in the family for 40 years. And it was my mom and stepfather's dream house, but my stepfather died. My mom never really came back for it. So the house just kind of fell apart. And what punctured me into seeing that was, somebody said to me, this house would be really depressing if it wasn't for you. I was like, but I have flowers and I put some of my paintings on the wall. But then I saw and it was like, I'm in my worst nightmare, or like I've been buried alive. But the beautiful part was, I realized very on in the process, this is part of resilience, because I'm a generation, I came out of politics, Texan who moved to Boston. I basically, my version of resilience for most of my life was like, I'll just get it done. Just get out
Hmm.
of my way. I'm just going to put my head down and push. And there's a moment in the show, which happened in my actual life, of realizing I can't do that. I literally, I was so exhausted. I'm sure you know this from your dad. So many people listening know this from, when you're caring for your parents and doing this every day, it just eats away at a little bit more of you. It is not a restorative journey at all. It is draining.
Yeah.
And, and so I was like, I don't have it in me to put my head down and push through. And I literally had this moment, which again is in the show, which is me realizing I don't got this. I'm not gonna be able to do it. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, but you have to do it. So how are you going to do it?
Mm.
And the three things that showed up for me was breathe. And so I took a little index card and I put breathe next to it, and I put it on my phone every night. So when I would wake up at 3 o'clock with like a panic attack, I would just, and then the second thing was let the angels in.
Mm.
And the third thing was see everything as a gift. And it immediately shifted the energy around all those pieces. And, one of the things I wrote about, because I got rid of almost everything, is realizing that my story, your story, the pieces of furniture, they are continuums on the mat, the string, the journey of human existence. And, I wrote about there's a light that my grandmother turned on every day of her life, starting in the 60s. When she passed, my mother turned it on. When I moved into the house, I turned it on. And there was a night that I was the last one in that
Mm.
lineage to ever turn it off.
Oh,
But
wow.
it will now but now it's with somebody else who turns it on. And I think that, again, I think when we hold on, we make things heavy.
Yes. And I love how you had these three things that you did. First, breathe, which to me is about going into the body. And I'm going to get you to unpack this idea of angels, right?
Yes.
It's like looking for your angels, which it to me seems like looking for the helpers,
It
right?
wasn't
Looking.
looking, it was to let them in.
That's right. Thank you very
That was a
much.
big difference. Because it was surrender. It was a vulnerability. Right.
Yes, and that's so hard for so many people, especially
Oh,
if you're a person who has experienced trauma. Oh, I'm raising my hand.
oh
Like,
yeah.
let
Hello.
people, let's see if that happens.
Right.
And
What
then,
happens when they don't show up?
right, exactly. So
Yep.
vulnerable. And then, to look at your perspective, right? Because gratitude is all about perspective. And so something that feeds you and also informs your perspective is shamanism. And, I think we have so many ideas about what shamanism is. I'm curious to know your definition of it and how you practice it and how that relates to letting the angels in.
Absolutely. So, I have wrestled with the definition. I so resonate with what you've just said, because how it's typically defined doesn't really resonate with me, and it doesn't resonate with other folks. So, the version I'm using in December of 2023, we'll see if this sticks, is we are multi-dimensional beings. And I think anyone can understand that who's ever looked up at the stars at night. Doesn't matter your belief, but if you've ever been impressed with the sunrise or the moon or the ocean, the tide, if you've ever followed the different telescopes, etc., we are multidimensional beings. And I think most of us are conditioned to live just on the surface dimension. And to me, the practice of shamanism just means that I go through life with a little bit of a broader lens and using a little more than the five senses. And it's so funny. I saw a quote from Mary Oliver today, and I love this because to me, this is the shamanic journey, the practice is to see through the heavenly visibles to the heavenly invisibles.
I love that.
And I think that's what I do. And this gets to breath, because when you see to the heavenly invisibles, while people who don't have that kind of a practice, that feels overwhelming, it actually totally centers you, because you move to that still point of being in an infinite, you're an infinite being in an infinite dimension. The multi dimensions do not have an end.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if you think of it as a scientist, if you think of it as a Christian, if you think it as a Buddhist, it's infinite. And so that's my practice, is to experience life in multi dimensions. And then the shamanic piece is to do that in service.
Mm.
And so it is in service to myself, but it is also in service to any being that is alive in any of those dimensions, past, present, or future. And I happen to do that as a storyteller, because I think storytelling to me, and that can be music, poetry, conversation, books, I find that storytelling brings us the closest to the edge of that which is indescribable. You could read a book on love or see a TED talk on love, it ain't going to do it. Look at Ryan O'Neal, who just passed, and the great story, The Love Story, The Way We Were, current films. I'm dating myself. Those stories, they're not a seminar on love. They tell the story of love. And that helps speak to the love we all carry, that we're all born with.
Yeah, and how I experience is that we embody story. When you're reading
Right.
story, when you are experiencing story, you are embodying it. And there's a way that, and I think this happens, both at the nervous system and in a cellular way,
Yeah,
you become the story.
that's right. Well, we're in it. Yeah, there is a book. I can't remember who wrote it. Oops, but there is a really great book for anyone listening who really does want to devote themselves to writing or just experience it. It's called Wired for Story. And it speaks to what you talk. It is literally, because the reptilian part of our existence still runs through us. And if you have a wonderful cat that you adore, I have a dog that I adore. My dog absolutely knows my story, and I know his story. We live a story.
Mm-hmm.
So the shamanic practice is try to have a multi-dimensional experience, try to do it of service, being of service, and do it through storytelling. And then the final piece I would add, which gets to the show, is in my practice, I more and more sense. So, we all have our own perspective. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but I more and more sense that the old paradigms really are crumbled, or that they have crumbled. You listen to somebody like Joseph Campbell, or you read Carl Jung, or you go back to Nietzsche, and they were saying what to some people feels original today, which is we need to start over.
Yeah.
And I'm a student of myth. Shamanism is a mystical, mythic practice, spirit practice. And Joseph Campbell had this great line that I just love, because it's like, why tell these stories? Why care? And it was, we are not guided by the same science of 2,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
or in America 250 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one would expect us to be. But we are guided by the same stories. And that doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
because they're not, how can they connect? And so to me, that's where this idea of new paradigms, new stories comes from. It doesn't mean you throw all of it out, but how could they possibly be the same? We're not the same.
Yeah. And this is making me think of a few things. I always give people a set of questions that we might talk about. And
Yep.
then we start talking and
Yep.
something else comes up. And so, I'm just going to pause for a second, because you said so many things that feel really beautiful. And what I like is this concept of infinite possibilities and infinite ways of looking at things, and letting go of stories that no longer serve us. And I recently did a webinar series, The Psychology of Memoir, and I
Mm.
talked about Joseph Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
And so feel free to say, I want to talk about this, or I don't.
Yeah.
Someone was talking about his misogyny and how he
Yep.
dismissed women.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that I hear a lot is fuck the patriarchy, right? Fuck the
Mm-hmm.
patriarchy, fuck this old way of doing things. I'm a little fuck the patriarchy, right? Because
Yep.
it's not,
Sure.
it's hasn't served us in certain ways. So the question I have is about story. And, sometimes what can happen when we want to shut something down, right? Fuck the patriarchy, or I have been hurt and I'm going to tell the story of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We close things down. We do not operate from a space of the infinite. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do we, from your perspective, open up to that? Not throw everything away, but also honor the fact that, certain ways of doing things haven't necessarily worked, or that we want to honor our hurt, but also not shut down. And I know I just asked you like a whole bunch of
Oh no, I
complicated
love that. I
things.
love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I can talk about Joseph Campbell forever. I will respond on two levels. I think that the emphasis on self-awareness that especially
Mm-hmm.
began in the 60s, I think it's also a paradigm that needs to be re-examined, because I think it is a multi-billion dollar industry now.
Yes, it is.
And as a wizard friend of mine, who's also a Lakota elder, loves to cryptically say, healers need people to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have industries that need people to heal. And so, you and I have had all kinds of conversations. I am not a passive person in my thinking at all. I'm a gay man that grew up in the days when the federal government was trying to kill my people, actively
Hmm.
trying to kill
Yes.
by pretending that AIDS didn't exist. But I think so that, I'll respond to this as a gay man, and I'll respond to this as someone who practices shamanism. As a
Hmm.
gay man, to me, the response is, fuck this, but what am I going to do today? Because
Yes.
I think too often we say, well, Joseph Campbell was a misogynist. Well, that person owned slaves. Well, the gay boys never recognized the trans heroes, heroines, and Stonewall. Okay. And what are you going to do? Because I think too often we're like, so fuck Joseph. I'm not going to read anything that Joseph Campbell had to say. I'm not going to acknowledge any contribution that gay people have because of this one story. Well, now you're just going to sit on the sidelines. And I'm all for that. Some people's journey, it is not mine. So that's what I would say as a gay man, as someone who practices shamanism. I would share one of my all-time favorite lines, which came from Osho, who has his own problems,
Hmm.
uh, but who of us doesn't? But it's one of my favorite lines, and it is, "Build your own path to your own temple." And he
Mm.
followed that with, "There is one Christian, Christ. There is one Buddhist, Buddha. Build your own temple." So if you go through life with that orientation, then you hear Joseph Campbell and you don't try to follow his footsteps, but you're like, is there anything in there that will help me build my own path?
Hmm.
And to me, then that's letting go. Your hands are open as you receive things. You're not beholden to any of it. You're not attached to it. But if it helps advance your path to your temple, use it.
And I think that's beautifully said, because as artists, it's really important for us to learn as much as we can about just even the craft of art, and yet to rebel against what doesn't serve our projects, to think about our work in different ways. And there's so
Yeah.
much that we are meant to do. And my cat Foxy is here with us. If you cannot
Foxy's all about
see
it.
her, she has
Yes.
this like beautiful fluffy tail, which she's slapping in my face. And yeah, and so I think that idea of like, okay, that there's truth in that, and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Is really
Anything
important.
useful here? I mean, I think somebody once described writing to me as, it's like you're on a perpetual archaeological dig. So you have these little toothbrushes, and you're like, okay, misogynist, yes. Super Eurocentric, yes. However, what could I find? Okay, well, Joseph Campbell had one of his great lines is, all that religion does is it puts someone between you and your God. Well, that's helpful to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's a good learning. That to me is part of resilience.
Well, and what I can, take away from what Campbell has done in the hero's journey, which there is also the heroine's journey, and there's many
That's right.
different
Yes,
ways,
yes, yeah.
that we can think about this, is that there are frameworks for stories. And
Yes.
when you understand that there are frameworks for stories and you study the frameworks, you can also find ways to bend the frameworks. If you are just out in the ocean floating with
Yes.
no vessel,
Yep.
you don't know how to get to a shore.
That's right.
And so we can find ways to think about these things that maybe need to change,
Mhm.
maybe don't serve us in the ways that we would like to, or they're outdated. And
Mhm.
yes, look for the truth, and then look for what else, or how
Right.
can we bend this to what is needed so that we can move forward and not be stuck in a space of like, not this, but not knowing what else.
That's right. Well, and I think, part of what resilience is, thank God my high school English teacher has died. I loved her to death, but she would die over my horrible grammar here. But, part of what resilience is not shutting down, is not stopping. And so, well, Brett Will Taylor, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I don't want to, I won't really look at that part, but does he have anything useful to share based on what I'm trying to write?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's part of the hero's journey. That I cannot stand that book. I mean, I always tell people, listen to Joseph Campbell, do not read him, because he's
Mm-hmm.
such an academe, which isn't my taste. But
Yeah.
when you just hear him talking, I mean, this is why the Bill Moyers thing took off. You're like, oh my gosh, like, okay, interesting, you know, if it's key, if it could help your story, part of resilience is looking around, being curious, digging, you know, not shutting down, not having a hard
Absolutely.
no. I don't think you can ever have a hard no in writing or anything creative.
No, and I always tell people, and I think in life too, like I never
Right.
say never because I've
Right.
learned that
Oh, the
anything I've ever
universe then
said,
is like,
oh yeah. Oh,
oh,
you
here you go, Lisa. Yeah.
exactly. And then I have to pull back on that. And, one of the things that I had to learn that has served me so well as a writer and just as a human being is learning how to live in the both and. And
Yes.
I learned this
Paradox.
from
Yep.
Brene Brown.
Yep.
I took this training with her, the Daring Greatly training, and it was like 6 months of studying these different things. And she said, I'm going to tell you something right now, and you're going to want to punch me in the nose. And I totally wanted to punch her in the nose.
Yep. Yep.
And that was, can you hold space for the idea that the people who have behaved badly in your life, who have hurt you deeply, were doing the best that they could?
No.
Can you hold space for that? That they were hurtful and they were doing the best that they could. And at that time, I had some pretty big wounds that I was working through. And there was a part of me that was like, fuck no, I can't. Like,
Yeah.
I just really couldn't. And then I felt stuck
Right.
because I didn't know where to maneuver. And that was part of my growth edge at that point, was to figure out, how can I acknowledge both?
Mhm.
And I think the more we can practice that, no matter what we're looking at, right, is that there can be wisdom and things can be there that are not okay or that don't serve us or that aren't working anymore.
Right.
It allows you to move forward in a different way.
I think that's right. And to me, I think it's, you know, can you hold that people could care about you even when they're not doing their best?
Yeah.
Hold that people have good idea. I mean, I have to, and this may not set well with people, but I'll go back to the days when I was politically and in service very active with the AIDS epidemic, and so many of our tribe was dying, and I will never forget being in a meeting, and this person, not a famous person, but this person was really just a jerk. Yeah, he had AIDS, but it was just a jerk. And I afterwards I just kept trying to be so nice. And after the meeting ended, this person who was older than me came up to me and said, I just want you to know, people who are dying can still be assholes. There are people who have AIDS who are assholes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Brene, and it was like, so we're gonna serve, but like, don't put them on a pedestal. Don't make, they're an asshole. He's an ass, this guy's an asshole. But we want to do what we can.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's none of us are perfect. And I usually find people who are super rigid about not being able to see that, they haven't done their own work.
Yeah. I agree. And I think sometimes when you come up with against those growth edges or that discomfort, it is a signal to do the work,
Right.
right? And that's why that discomfort exists in your life. Resilience is not about reaching some space where things no longer bother you.
That's right. Oh God,
It's,
no.
it's about figuring out how to live in the muck, to
Yes.
be with it and say, okay, yeah, this sucks and I can be present
Right.
and I can be with it.
Yeah.
And so, how do you stay present in your own life and in the writing that you're doing?
God, I wish I did. No, because I mean, I think, some days some moments I am, some moments I'm not. How do I stay present? I breathe. I'm a big believer in breath. I'm not great at it. That's why we practice. But if I can remember and breathe, even 3 or 5 breaths, it makes all the difference in the world. I stay present. It's interesting. I've written for some time now, and as you know, I had some work that was public in New Orleans. But doing this show is the first time. I will not call myself an artist, but where I can sense what people say about an artist and how it's just a very different way of life. And one of the ways I stay present is I am in service to this show. I talked about it as part of my shamanic practice. You're in service to, right? Otherwise, you're just navel gazing or trying to be better than everybody else. But I am in service to this show. And it's almost like I keep this show in a metaphorical box or container. And I sit down with great intention, lowercase g, sometimes probably mediocre intention, but I try to have intention. And I open that box up and I try to be present to whatever shows up and to stay in service. Because I find if I'm in service, I have gratitude. It's literally like this, that sinking back, that settling in. If I'm trying to race to a deadline, if I'm trying to heal some past wrong, etc., I'm not present.
Yeah. And I think having strong intentions is so important. And I always tell people, have an intention even before you start the project.
Yeah.
Come up with an intention, and that intention should not be about what you're going to do out in the world with whatever this is, but how is this going to change you?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you know the change inside, you bring that energy to the project, and then you allow yourself to be of service to it because the project is of service to you. So there's this reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, it's a collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that. And let your intention change.
Hmm.
Because you're going to learn, you're going to grow. Not just, I love what you just said. You're not going to grow as an artist. The story is not going to grow. You're going to grow as a human. And I think the other thing I would say is, and my mom is pretty good about this. My mom has said from the beginning, you tell whatever you need to tell. And I think part of being present is I'm in service to the story and only the story.
Yeah.
I'm not in service to my friends. I'm not in service to my family. That is huge when you're a writer or doing something that most people don't do. Because what's the first thing they should say? Are you not done? Are you still working on stuff? I thought you were going to be done. And so you just stay present. I stay present with the story,
And I think that's so important because, yes, if you are just listening to this podcast and you are not a writer, it takes a really long time to get things done. And we get asked all the time. And I think what happens is that people who love us and are excited about what we do, they want to know, are you done? Are you done? Because they're so interested in seeing the final product and enjoying it and celebrating you. And what can happen though is that it can create great shame that you are not done
Absolutely.
because society expects you to produce. And
Yes.
so part of, I think, being present is being willing to be with the story, whatever that is, and also understanding what finished feels like so that you
Mm.
know the difference. So for
Mm.
you, when you think about projects you've worked on, or even just the house, right? How you knew that you were turning off the light for the last time, what
Yeah.
did that feel like for you?
It's going to sound like I'm being cutesy with words. Complete.
And where did you feel the completion in your body?
My whole body. Like even when I say it now, it's from my head to my toe. There is nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because you're exhausted. It is the fruit falling from the tree. It's done.
Yes. And I always feel it like a relaxing of the limbs, like an
Yeah.
exhale.
Yes.
It always feels like the breath was leaving and no more breath has to come in.
Correct. And I think it's complete. And I'm not saying this to you to be cutesy or to you even directly. There's literally nothing left to say.
Yeah.
Now you could retell it, but you will retell it exactly the same way because there is nothing to add and there
Mm-hmm.
is nothing to subtract because it is complete, which I think is such a beautiful gift of grace to be able to experience. I think your cat wants the windows, the shades. I love
Yes, my cats have decided that they're sleeping when I do all of this, but today they're like, "Oh, you're doing a podcast? We're going to join you
that.
today."
That's right. We're your
And
production team.
yeah, and so they are here and they do want to look out the window. I have both cats here today, so you
Good.
might see them in the background.
Yeah.
Um, because I think they're exploring these ideas too,
Oh,
and
sure.
and because I was gone for almost 6 weeks,
Yeah.
I wasn't here, and who knows, maybe they thought I was complete, that there was nothing left.
Right.
And they're grateful, like, you're back, we're
Yep,
here.
that's right. Well,
So
and you're
we get
back with
some,
something new. Yeah.
right. And new
Sure.
energy and new ways of thinking about things. One thing I want to talk about as well is voice, right? And we
Okay.
have, like, I've had my cats vocalizing in the background today.
Yes.
I think part of being present and owning your power is finding your voice. And it
Hmm.
can be so difficult to know what that voice is. And when you think about this project, which gets to some really vulnerable stuff around, your history and all kinds of things, how did you find the voice for this? And how do you know you are finding the right voice? Like, what is that experience for you?
That's such a great question. So I want to give a preamble because it's something that was so shattering to me. I just want to acknowledge to anybody who's starting writing. It'll be quick. I spent many years, parts of my career, as writing for others. And I was very good at it. And I could just sit down and be like, Lisa, here's your story. Then I kind of got this shamanic idea to become a writer. And I went and I bought a new computer and I did all this stuff. You probably had a lot of books on my desk. And I opened it up to write, and I couldn't because I did not know my voice. I almost get goosebumps thinking about it. It was terrifying because I knew exactly what was happening, that I could only express myself through others. So I would say to anybody listening to this, whether they're writing or any kind of expression, keep at it because your voice will show up. And I think for this show, there's sort of a two-step process to answering your question. So one is, which I think is so important with anything you're writing, I've had to get very clear on the story of the show, right?
Mhm.
Because writing is, for some, writing is a retelling, but for me it's a story, and a story is very different than here's what happened. So I've had to get clear on the story, and then I've had to make sure I am telling that story from my experience,
Mhm.
not everyone else's. I am not saying this is everybody else's journey, but I used to give political speeches. I used to talk about the we and the world. For whatever reason, right now, my call is to tell my story and stop,
Mhm.
not generalize. And then I have to make sure I'm being honest. And honest means I am at least authentically on the path of healing. And to
Yeah.
me, that means I'm not angry. I am not resentful. I'm detached.
Mhm.
I'm beginning the process of detached. I'm getting back to that heavenly visibles to heavenly invisibles. So I would say it's that. I'm clear on, so my voice has to be consistent with the story. It has to be just my voice, not everybody's voice. When you're an opinionated guy like me, or maybe you're just a guy, patriarchy, that's a hard thing to do. But then the third thing is to be detached, to not be, I'm not trying to settle any scores with the show. And I want, the voice for this is one of compassion and gratitude.
Yeah, and I love that, this idea of getting to that place of detachment. And I sometimes tell people, write the angry part first.
Absolutely.
Not because that's the end result, right? But that
Right.
if you don't honor whatever the angry part, the resentful part, all of
Oh,
these different parts of
yeah.
self, it's going to show up in
Oh,
ways that you
totally.
don't imagine, and then
Right.
you're going to not feel great about it.
Yeah. Or
So,
you could be like, where did this come from? I don't
yeah.
know if you ever had this. I've had times where I'm reading a draft and I'm like, I don't even remember all these words, but here they are, you know?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, but even more so, you hand it off to a beta reader or
Oh
someone
gosh,
else, and
yes.
then they're like, where did this come from? What
Right.
is this thing? And you are like, whoa, I did not know that was coming out. But it's just part of the human experience. And I love this idea of inviting the voice in, right? Just show up,
Yeah.
because when you show up, you are saying, I am here. And
Yeah.
you're saying, like, I'm available. And
Yeah.
so much of creativity and the work that we have to do, whether it is creativity, healing, anything, is about showing up and saying, I am available, right?
Right.
That openness to what could happen. And one of the things that you've said to me is your goal in life, or your role. Like, this is what I'm here to do. And I'll start with, for me, one of the things I've really learned, and I've done a lot of exploration of, like, what is my life's mission? Like, what am I here to do? And why am I here to do it? And And I've asked a lot of people, why do you come to me? Like, what is it that you care about? Or what is it that I do that feels like it's of service? And for me, it's I make people feel safe, or at least this is what people tell me. I make people feel safe, and I make them feel safe enough and inspired enough to take the next step, to grow in some way, whether it's growing in their writing projects or trying to heal or taking some kind of risk, that's the work that I do out in the world. And I'm trying to embrace that and say, okay, whatever it is I do, whether it's this podcast or books that I write or wherever, how do I infuse that into my work? And in the conversations you and I have had, you help people live into the mystery.
Yes.
So, what is that, and how can we live into the mystery?
Well, I go back to heavenly visibles, to heavenly invisibles, to multidimensional. And what I say to people is I want to share stories. I like to help people find their stories that bring them to the edge of mystery. I go back to the comparison to love. There is not a course out there that will teach you how to fall in love or how to be a good partner. Now,
Yeah.
there are courses that can help you think through the emotions. There's lots of courses that are like, you can't be in love with someone else till you're in love with yourself, though God knows many of us have tried. I've tried that several times. But I can share stories that bring people to the edge of mystery. And, it's interesting. I have said more than once, and I'm aware this is rather arrogant, but I don't mean it as arrogant. I mean it as a calling, a response. Stephen Sondheim talked about when he first, after he did West Side Story and Gypsy, that he decided he wanted to do a different kind of musical. Norman Lear had the same idea, which was musicals about people's real lives.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we all have Ethel Merman on our stage singing Everything Is Coming Up Roses. So that was his contribution to musical theater. He brought the real world into it. And what I would like this show to help start doing is to bring the mystery into theater, to put the mysticism on, not on this, just on the stage, but in the theater, so that people, it's not surrender, so that people are transported from the inside to the outside into the mystery, into that multidimensionality. Because if you're able to have that multidimensional experience, awareness, if you're able to have a broader lens, use more than five senses, of course you will still feel the pain, but you will have far greater tools to address it, to name it, and to heal from it than if you're just in one dimension. And to me, that's why, I don't want people to be in the mystery to sing Kumbaya unless that's what they want to do. And if so, go for it. But it's like, it gives you more tools. Life is hard.
Yes.
Life is hard. It's always been hard. It's not just the last couple of years. It's always been hard. And why not tap into an infinite toolbox
Mm-hmm.
to get through it? Because it does help.
Yeah, and I love that. And when I think about the memoir that I completed, Please Stage Drive Carefully, and how the memoir, when I was writing it, I got to this draft where I had written through all of the painful parts, my brother's suicide and the hurts that had happened and, my first marriage and all of these things. And then I came to this place of writing it and going like, holy cow, all of this was in service to me. I was
Yeah.
cared for in all of these ways. And it does not take away the fact that having a family member die by suicide is incredibly painful, and it's never not painful. Like, you learn how to carry the pain, right? It's not that the pain goes away, you learn how to carry it. And so in that way it feels smaller because you've learned how to carry it. But or that, things that people do don't hurt, but that there is another layer,
Yeah.
that story is about growth, that those things changed you, and at times they might have hurt you, but they changed you in these fundamentally positive ways. And to the point where, of course, if I could have my brother back, I would have him back in a second. And I am grateful to the ways that I have changed as a result of his passing, right? Both things are true. And I think when you can think in those multiple layers, pull back the lens to say, yeah, the human lens, super hard, confusing, chaotic, awful. How's it for my good? How is this serving me? It opens up the mystery, because then you're like, Holy fucking shit. This was pretty awesome at a cosmic level, even though it sucked big time
Yeah.
when I was going through it.
I think that's so beautiful and so typical of you because it's so honest. It's interesting listening to you. And I think I'll use this going forward when people ask about my practice or what I would say about this show. When you're able, heavenly visibles to heavenly invisibles, when you broaden that lens, the main thing you understand is that you are not alone.
Yes.
That's the number one. And, no one in my family offered to help with the house. I had family members who lived 10 miles away. None of them even ever texted to say, how's it going? Or can we send you food? It was, and there's a whole story with my mother about some of the stuff that not inappropriate between us, but like the sort of burden that was, my mother even said at one point, this is almost cruel what you're being asked to do. And it was her house. But it's like, so I went through it totally alone. And it's, now that is the heaviness of, like you mentioned with the furniture. But when you bring in the angels, when you breathe, when you see it from a place of gratitude gifts, you realize you're not alone. And what that means different things to different people across different dimensions. But that to me, that's how we heal. I mean, yes, you had to go through your process with your brother, with your family. I did. But at some point, I think the healing comes and you're like, oh, and it wasn't just me. And I have this one incident that is really, really hard, but then I have all these things over here, you know? And so you're able to reach out and to open your hands. So to me, that's it. You just realize you're not alone.
Yes, and that is one of the most important things that we can realize and embrace and understand and know. And that is a huge part of resilience. So I
It's
have
huge.
two final questions for you.
Yeah.
What is the best piece of writing advice that you have received?
That's easy. It's a story, but it's literally like a 20-30 second story. So I did a weekly column in New Orleans that also included every other week. I've never known if it's bi or semi-weekly radio commentary. And I talked to my editor I was like, oh, I'm stuck and blah, 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 all the things we use, right? I won't even talk about that because I want to hold this to 30 seconds or so. And she was like, Brett Will, this is what you're going to do. And I'm like, oh, she's been an editor for 35 years. Time's picking in. I can't wait. She's like, I want you to go to the bathroom. I want you to get a glass of water. I want you to sit down. And she said, do not get up until you've written what you're supposed to write. And to me, that is the best piece of advice. At some point, I had a yoga teacher who used to I would talk about this, that, and she would be like, get on the mat. All your
Mhm.
questions, answer, get on the mat. And I think that you got to write. That's not original, but I think it is, you have to sit down and write.
Yes. And if you don't, you could have the best idea, the best story in your brain. If you
Yeah.
don't get it on the page, there's nothing you can do with it.
No.
So,
And
yeah.
yeah. And by the way, to me, part of resilience is, I mean, I love to use the word you have life because it's energy, right? Multidimensional. You have to constantly calibrate. I do not find it is helpful to write the same 2 hours every day or even sit and write every day. It goes through waves.
Hmm.
But I hold myself honest by, if a week goes by and I haven't written, I have a serious conversation about why. And sometimes there
Yes.
isn't why. And then it's like, well, you're not going to go 2 weeks,
Hmm.
even if you write a paragraph. But it's a collaboration. You're in service to the writing, and you can't do that if you're not home. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. You absolutely have to be there for it. And how do you nurture your resilience?
Whew. I talk to people like you. I mean, in our friendship, I lay on the floor and I love my dog, and I increasingly call in check my self critic. I think you sent out a newsletter today that I looked at that was like, all the anxiety of year end. What have I done? What have I not done? And it's like, so flip it. What have you done? And I do battle every day at about 3 a.m. with my self critic who will creep in and be like, you haven't done anything. You're not going to amount to anything. It's too late, etc. And you have to check it, which to me, all of that is, I have a practice.
Absolutely. You have to have a practice and
Yeah.
you have to show up to the practice.
Yeah, and you have to listen to it and respond.
You do. And
Yeah.
that's a huge piece of it is listen to the call. If people want to learn more about you and what you're doing, what is the best way for them to do that?
So Facebook, it's Brett Will Taylor page, I believe, or Brett Will Taylor author. And it's you'll know it because there's a picture of me with headphones on. And then I also have a website, brettwilltaylor.today. Or you can Google me. I mean, if you Google me, I'm lucky to have been at this long enough. There's a couple of different ways. So
And if people did not catch that, it will also show up in the show notes. And
perfect.
one of the things I would say is that you have so many beautiful stories that you have written on Facebook about your
Mhm.
experience. And so, if you're listening to this or watching our conversation today, I would say go to Facebook, check out his stories. It will give you a sense of how he writes and also how he sees the world and what it looks like to live into the mystery. But you
Yeah.
have so many different pieces that I just absolutely love where you do that.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I am just honored to have you and so grateful to call you friend.
Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Are you a writer who struggles with doubts? Do you wonder if your stories are good enough? Do you wish you had some simple tricks that would make the writing life just a little bit easier? Become part of my Writing and Resilience community by signing up for my newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, 5 Brain Hacks that will supercharge your productivity, creativity, and confidence. The link is in the show notes. That's it for today's episode. Before you leave, I would love your help spreading the word about this podcast. You can do this in a few very simple ways. Click on the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, then leave a 5-star review. You can also let me know what you think or share ideas for the podcast by connecting with me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or through my Writing and Resilience newsletter, which you can have delivered directly to your inbox.